The morning fog still clung to the edges of the Navy base when Emma Rivers stepped off the transport bus. The chill of early dawn seemed to follow her every move, brushing against her cheekbones as though testing her resilience. She carried nothing but a standard-issue duffel bag slung over her shoulder, and her posture was so perfectly controlled it drew the subconscious attention of every passerby, even before they knew who she was. Her uniform was spotless, starched to near-impossible perfection. Boots clicked against the concrete like a soft, precise drumbeat, echoing slightly in the empty courtyard. She didn't glance at anyone, didn't acknowledge the junior enlisted personnel who were huddled near the gate gossiping, whispering, their curiosity already veering toward mockery. To them, she was just another new girl, nervous, inexperienced, probably fragile. "She looks so tiny," one whispered. "Bet she's scared already." "Relaxed, too relaxed," another muttered. "She's hiding something, watch her." Emma didn't hear. She didn't need to. Her focus was absolute, her mind moving faster than anyone could guess. Each step was measured, deliberate, precise, as though she were already calculating the trajectory of every interaction she would have on this base. And though no one knew it yet, they were underestimating the one person whose presence would soon change the course of their day, and perhaps their careers. A group of midshipmen passed by, nudging each other. "New girl alert. Let's see if she's worth laughing at." Emma didn't react. She never did. That was part of her strength: silence, patience, control. The air around her seemed denser, almost electrified. The juniors assumed it was shyness or maybe intimidation, but in reality it was command presence, innate and undeniable. Her first stop was the drill yard, where groups of sailors were already practicing maneuvers. She observed silently, scanning faces, nodding ranks, memorizing routines, identifying patterns. Her eyes flicked from squad to squad, cataloging every detail with the precision of a strategist. She didn't smile. She didn't speak. She simply moved with the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. A few whisperers gathered near a railing, staring at her. "She walks like she owns the place," one said. "You think she actually does?" "She's new," his friend said. "Nobody owns anything yet. Wait till someone puts her in her place." Those words, meant to mock, meant nothing to Emma. She didn't flinch. She didn't even look at them. Her mind was elsewhere, reviewing base protocols, scanning security feeds, checking the timing of the morning drills. She was already 3 steps ahead, though no one could see it, and that was exactly how she wanted it. By the time she reached the operations building, the sun had begun to pierce the fog, casting long, dramatic shadows across the yard. Every surface, every silhouette seemed magnified in the morning light. She paused for a moment at the entrance, fingers brushing against the doorframe as though grounding herself. In that instant, she noticed the subtle tension in the air, the slight stiffening of shoulders, the fleeting glance of someone checking her face, trying to read her, trying to find weakness. The base had rules, unspoken codes, hierarchies that were often more rigid than any manual could express. And Emma Rivers knew them all. She didn't need to ask. She didn't need to be told. No one, not even the most observant, had any idea. She walked past the operations building with the quiet confidence of someone who had commanded more authority in a single glance than most sailors would see in a decade of service. A group of junior enlisted boys muttered something under their breath. "Who does she think she is?" Emma didn't respond. She never did. She let the whispers swirl around her like wind around a rock, irrelevant, powerless, meaningless. At the far side of the yard, a group of mid-level officers were already scanning the perimeter, checking in with their teams. One of them, a lieutenant named Marcus Hall, noticed Emma. He tilted his head, curious. There was something different about this girl, something that didn't fit. She wasn't like the others, not new recruits, not cadets. She carried herself like she had seen every kind of challenge the Navy could throw at her, and survived it all without a scratch. Hall exchanged a look with his sergeant, who shrugged. "Probably just lucky," the sergeant muttered. Emma had already entered the building, moving through corridors lined with steel lockers, surveillance screens, and rows of desks cluttered with papers. Her eyes scanned the digital panels displaying ship locations, supply inventories, and personnel reports. Each glance was swift, yet comprehensive, a single sweep that cataloged an entire wing. She paused briefly at a terminal, reviewing logs, cross-referencing entries. Every detail mattered. Nothing escaped her attention. And in the shadows, someone was watching. Corporal Dalton, a self-important petty officer, had been observing her since she stepped off the bus. He had made a name for himself by intimidating new recruits, exploiting ignorance, and basking in the social hierarchy he so carefully cultivated. He smirked as he saw her quietly inspecting the operations terminal, assuming she was fumbling through basic procedures she didn't understand. "She looks lost," he whispered to a buddy. "I bet she won't last the week." His friend snorted. "You think she knows what she's doing? Doubt it. Let's see how long it takes her to screw up." Emma's eyes flicked up from the screen, catching them out of the corner of her vision. Her expression didn't change, but her awareness sharpened. Every whisper, every glance, every tiny reaction was noted, stored, analyzed. She didn't move toward them. She didn't need to. In that moment, they were already under observation. Her footsteps echoed down the corridor as she continued toward the mess hall for her first official meal on base. Even here, in a space designed for casual conversation and camaraderie, she exuded calm authority. She chose a corner table, placed her tray down, and sat with perfect posture, hands neatly folded until she began to eat. Dalton noticed immediately. He saw a new target, someone to mock, someone to assert dominance over. He strutted toward her table, chest puffed, confidence practically radiating. "Well, well," he said loudly, making sure his friends heard, "if it isn't the new girl." Emma looked up, meeting his gaze. Calm, unreadable, almost imperceptible in its force. Dalton smiled, certain she would shrink, apologize, or fumble. "You must be lost," he said. "You can't just sit wherever you want. There's a hierarchy here, and trust me, you'll learn fast." Emma's hand paused over her fork. She didn't flinch. She didn't smile. Her voice, when it finally came, was low, measured, and icy. "Is that so?" The cafeteria fell into a hush, though no one outside the group fully understood why. There was something in the way she said it, a stillness that demanded attention, a weight to her presence that felt unnatural for a new girl. Dalton leaned closer, trying to assert himself further. "Yeah, and you should probably show some respect before you get in trouble." Emma didn't move. She didn't respond immediately. But when she finally looked up, her eyes locked on his with an intensity that made him step back slightly. There was no warmth, no anger, just sheer, implacable authority. And that's when she said the words that would change everything. "You should stand." Dalton laughed. "Stand for what?" Emma's voice dropped to a level that made the edges of the room seem quieter, as though the world itself leaned in to listen. "Because you are addressing someone far above your pay grade." Dalton blinked. Confusion, disbelief, and a flicker of fear crossed his face. The whispers in the cafeteria swelled. Someone gasped. The energy in the room shifted imperceptibly, but powerfully. Emma Rivers, the quiet, seemingly harmless new girl, had just reminded everyone that appearances were deceptive. And the first ripple of chaos she would cause on this base was only beginning. The mess hall had always been a theater of unspoken hierarchies, a place where rank, ego, and social maneuvering collided with the clatter of trays and the hum of conversation. Emma Rivers moved through it like a ghost, calm and deliberate, holding her tray with steady hands. Her uniform, crisp and spotless, caught the dim morning light filtering through the high windows, giving her an almost ethereal presence. No one had yet dared to speak to her, until Corporal Dalton decided to make a name for himself. Dalton was a man built more on bravado than skill. His boots scuffed the linoleum like drumbeats announcing his arrival, his chest puffed out, his friends flanking him like junior lieutenants in a theater of his own ego. He dropped his tray on the table across from her, rattling her silverware, and leaned in, a smirk plastered across his face. "So," he said, his voice loud enough for several tables to turn, "you're the new girl everyone's talking about." Emma's gaze lifted slowly, meeting his eyes. There was a softness at first, like the calm before a storm, but it was an illusion, a measured mask. Beneath it, every neuron, every muscle, every microexpression screamed command. Dalton, of course, didn't notice. He never did. "Just trying to eat," she said softly, her words deliberate, controlled. Dalton laughed, a sharp, false sound. Awa relaxed, cute, "But let me explain something. Around here you don't just sit wherever you want. There's structure, rules, order, things you'll need to learn if you're going to survive." His two companions snickered, echoing his mockery. "She doesn't look like she can follow much structure," one said, leaning in slightly as if to underline the point. Emma's fork hovered midair. Her eyes flicked over each of them, memorizing every detail. The way Dalton's fingers tapped nervously on the table, the small twitch of his jaw, the shallow breath of his friend behind him. Every motion, every hesitation, every crack in their facade was a blueprint. "You should stand," she said, almost imperceptibly, yet the words cut through the din of the cafeteria like a blade. Dalton's smirk faltered. "Stand, for what?" he asked, though now his confidence wavered just a fraction. Emma's voice dropped, steady and precise, echoing in the small space between them. "Because you're addressing someone far above your pay grade." For a moment, silence. The background chatter of the mess hall seemed to dull, as if the room itself was leaning in to witness this moment. Dalton laughed nervously, trying to mask the creeping unease. "Or what?" he challenged, though the edge in his voice had gone soft, wavering. Emma lifted her gaze fully now, eyes locking onto his. Her calm had transformed into something colder, something sharper. "Or I will ensure that everyone understands exactly how far above you I am," she said. Her words carried no threat, only fact. The kind of immutable certainty that made someone feel tiny without raising a hand. Dalton's smirk cracked, a bead of sweat forming at his temple. He shuffled his weight, trying to regain some sense of dominance, but it slipped through his fingers like smoke. He glanced at his buddies, who were frozen, unsure of what to do. The social pecking order had shifted, and they were the ones standing at the bottom. Then, from the far end of the mess hall, a ripple passed through the crowd. Heads turned. Conversations paused. Everyone instinctively knew the sound of authority when it walked into the room. "Admiral Stevens." The base commander entered silently, yet his presence filled every corner. Navy blues sharp against the cafeteria lighting, metals catching faint glints of sunlight, posture perfect. Every eye turned, yet none more startled than Dalton's. Stevens' gaze swept across the room, landing finally on Emma. The change was subtle, almost imperceptible to anyone untrained, but Emma noticed immediately. A small nod, a barely perceptible relaxation of his rigid stance, a silent acknowledgement. He saluted. The room froze. Dalton's jaw fell. His friends looked as if they'd seen a ghost. For a moment, time itself seemed suspended. It wasn't just the salute, it was who received it. Not a superior saluting a junior, not a routine acknowledgement. A junior received a salute from the Admiral. Emma returned it with perfect form, her face composed, almost unreadable. A faint gleam of triumph flashed in her eyes, but it was tempered by something else: calculation. She had won this first battle, but the war, the deeper, more dangerous currents of deceit running through this base, was only beginning. Dalton stumbled backward, tripping over his own ego. The whispers around the mess hall swelled. "Wait, she's the Admiral," someone breathed. "Yes, that's Admiral Rivers," another confirmed, voice trembling slightly. The shock that gripped Dalton was a tangible thing. All the teasing, the plotting, the sense of superiority, it crumbled in an instant. He had aimed to intimidate, to dominate, to make a name for himself at someone else's expense. Instead, he had stepped into a room with a force no one dared challenge. Emma's voice, calm and deliberate, cut through the hushed chatter. "Continue your lunch, Corporal," she said. Her tone left no room for debate. "We'll discuss your understanding of respect later." Dalton opened his mouth, closed it again, eyes wide. He tried to protest, to find some leverage, but the words caught in his throat. Emma's gaze didn't waver, and the weight behind it pressed down like an invisible vice. As the Admiral walked past, her eyes briefly scanning the room, Dalton's mind raced. How could this have happened? The new girl, the one they thought was a nobody, easy pickings, was the Admiral herself. And if she had been here this whole time, quietly observing, calmly analyzing, what else had she seen? What else did she know? The realization was horrifying. Dalton's carefully constructed world, the one where he held dominance and understood the rules, was suddenly meaningless. And that panic made him do something he wouldn't have considered before. He watched. He observed just as she had been observing him, hopping to find a loophole, a weakness, any shred of control. But there was none. Emma Rivers moved through the mess hall like a predator among prey, unassuming yet fully aware, every step deliberate, every glance calculated. She took her seat, picked up her fork, and ate as if nothing had happened. But in that quiet, controlled act, she was asserting power far greater than Dalton, or anyone else in the room, could comprehend. The cafeteria murmurs grew louder, a low hum of curiosity, fear, and awe. Everyone sensed the shift. Emma Rivers wasn't just the new girl. She was the force behind the scenes, the person whose mere presence altered the dynamics of the base. Dalton sank into his chair, trying to pretend nothing had happened, but his hands trembled slightly. His buddies stared at him, wide-eyed, and then at her, realizing that their morning's entertainment had become something far more dangerous than they could have imagined. And in that instant, Emma knew exactly what she would do next. She had walked onto this base unnoticed, underestimated, dismissed. And now they would all learn there was no underestimating her ever again. But the cafeteria drama was just the beginning. She hadn't arrived here for lunch. She hadn't arrived to simply assert her authority. There was a reason she had returned to this base unannounced, undercover, and observing every detail. Something was wrong. Very wrong. And Dalton, oblivious in his fear and guilt, had just stepped onto the stage of a drama far bigger than he or anyone was ready to handle. Because the new girl wasn't new at all. She had come back to the base with a purpose that would change everything. And the first storm was about to hit. The moment Emma Rivers returned the Admiral's salute, the mess hall fell into a heavy silence. Clattering trays, murmuring sailors, and the faint hiss of the coffee machine all seemed to vanish into a void. Every pair of eyes turned to the figure who had walked in, the man who had commanded fleets and reshaped naval operations with decades of experience. Rear Admiral Stevens. Yet it wasn't just his presence that stunned everyone. It was the subtle, almost imperceptible acknowledgement he gave her. The slight nod, the way he straightened his posture as if someone had reminded him of a forgotten truth. Then, the almost ceremonial gesture that froze the cafeteria in its tracks. He saluted first. Heads swiveled, whispers ignited like sparks on dry kindling. Did he just salute her? A young sailor whispered. Yes, another confirmed, eyes wide, voice barely audible. The Admiral saluted the new girl. Dalton's mouth hung open. His smug bravado, the cocky grin he had carried like armor, evaporated in a single heartbeat. His two companions flinched, their confidence already unraveling. They hadn't just misjudged the situation, they had completely misread reality. Emma returned the salute flawlessly, her eyes steady, precise. There was no arrogance in her gaze, only control, command. Authority that demanded recognition without words, without ceremony. It was an invisible force, a presence that made even seasoned officers momentarily reconsider the natural order of rank and authority. "Good to have you back on base, Admiral Rivers," Rear Admiral Stevens said, his voice calm, deliberate, carrying through the silence. Though no one outside the room had been expecting it, the words felt ceremonial, almost sacred. Dalton's knees felt weak. His friends shifted uneasily, their eyes darting around, trying to gauge reactions from the surrounding tables. The reality hit them like a tidal wave. This was no ordinary new recruit. Emma's expression remained unreadable, but a flicker of acknowledgement passed through her eyes. She had anticipated the shock, prepared for it. Yet it was never about humiliation. It was about control, about establishing presence in a base where appearances had been deceiving. For years, the hierarchy of this Navy base had been defined by subtle manipulation, by social jockeying, by whispered rumors and quiet intimidation. And in one measured moment, Emma Rivers shattered all of it. Dalton swallowed hard, trying to find footing in a room that had shifted beneath him. His mind raced. How could he have been so blind? The new girl, the one he had mocked, dismissed, and planned to dominate, was the highest-ranking officer in the building. Around the mess hall, the other sailors exchanged glances. Murmurs rippled through the room like a rising tide. Admiral Rivers, the youngest female admiral in Navy history. Is this for real? She was undercover. None of them knew what to make of it, and that uncertainty was part of Emma's calculated advantage. Control wasn't just authority, it was psychology, influence, and awareness. Dalton and his buddies were frozen because the entire landscape of their understanding had been overturned. Emma's gaze briefly flicked past Dalton, sweeping over the mess hall, the walls lined with posters of recruitment drives, past training schedules and framed commendations. She wasn't here for lunch. She wasn't here to assert a casual reminder of rank. She was here to observe, assess, and most importantly, identify cracks in the base's operational integrity. Whispers grew louder as the crowd began to piece together what had happened. A few younger sailors, still catching their breath from the shock, speculated in hushed tones. "Do you think she noticed that we've been messing up the records?" "She doesn't need to notice," another replied. "She probably already knows everything we've done wrong and then some." Dalton's companions looked at him helplessly, realizing they were about to be swept up in a storm they had no idea how to weather. They had underestimated Emma Rivers, and the consequences of that miscalculation were only beginning to crystallize. Emma stood, finally moving toward the exit of the mess hall. Her steps were deliberate, unhurried, each one echoing softly on the linoleum floor. She had eaten, she had made her point, and she had observed. Every glance, every murmur, every fleeting gesture had been catalogued. Dalton tried to move, to say something, anything, that might restore his sense of control, but the words caught in his throat. He realized too late that authority wasn't something one could bluff or steal. It was earned, inherent, and in this case, wielded with precision. Behind the astonishment, however, another emotion stirred: curiosity. Emma's presence wasn't random. She hadn't appeared for a ceremonial visit. No one returned to a base unannounced, undercover, unless there was a purpose, a reason that went far beyond cafeteria posturing. Dalton's mind raced. What could she possibly be investigating? Was it personnel, supplies, operational strategy? And if she had returned under the radar, observing every detail, what had she already discovered? Emma exited the mess hall into the pale morning light, the fog of the early day giving her movements an almost spectral quality. Her eyes scanned the corridors, observing patterns, noting inconsistencies. There was a rhythm to her observation, a cadence honed over years of service, a precision that made her more formidable than any uniform or medal could convey. As she walked past the Central Operations Office, a senior lieutenant caught her eye and immediately straightened, a nervous but respectful smile forming. She nodded subtly, acknowledging him without breaking her composure. Dalton, watching from the doorway, felt a creeping dread. The cafeteria had been only the first act. He had no idea what the new girl would do next, but one thing was painfully clear. This was no ordinary assignment, and she was no ordinary officer. Even the seasoned officers on the base, who had watched her walk the corridors silently, realized something profound. Emma Rivers had returned with purpose. She was here not just to reclaim her authority, but to uncover truths that could shake the base to its foundation. And in that instant, Dalton understood a terrifying reality. The morning's confrontation was merely a prelude. The real challenge, the one that would test his wit, courage, and loyalty, hadn't yet begun. Emma paused at the stairwell leading to the administration wing. She glanced back at the mess hall, her eyes sweeping the room one final time. The whispers had grown to a low murmur, a mixture of awe, fear, and curiosity. Dalton's friends nudged him, eyes wide. She's the Admiral," one whispered shakily. Dalton nodded numbly, unable to speak. His chest felt tight. His ego had been stripped away, layer by layer, in moments, and in its place, a gnawing uncertainty took root. Emma descended the stairwell slowly, every step precise, deliberate, as if she were walking through a minefield. But the minefield was invisible to anyone else. Her presence commanded attention, respect, and fear without a word of threat. The corridors ahead were quiet, sterile, lined with bulletin boards and procedural notices. But Emma's mind was already elsewhere, calculating, analyzing, tracing the threads of operations, noting the subtle misalignments that would reveal the cracks in the system. And then a flash of movement in the corner of her eye. A pair of junior officers huddled near a doorway, trying desperately not to be noticed, confirmed what she already suspected. Someone on the base had been careless. Someone had underestimated the reach of her awareness. Emma's lips curved into the faintest of smiles, not for amusement, but for anticipation. The real work was about to begin. The whispers, the stares, the disbelief, they were nothing. They were just the first ripple in a tide that would soon crash through the base. Dalton had assumed he understood power. He had assumed he could manipulate the new girl, intimidate her, or at least observe without consequence. But he had been wrong. Every assumption he had made had been shattered in one simple act, the salute. And as Emma disappeared into the administration wing, moving with purpose toward her next observation, Dalton felt a cold, sinking realization. The cafeteria confrontation had only introduced the storm. The storm wasn't over. It was only beginning. By the time Emma Rivers reached the far end of the administration wing, the base had transformed. What had been a quiet morning, punctuated by routine drills and murmured greetings, now hummed with tension. The news had traveled faster than any official announcement could have. The new girl was the Admiral. Whispers filled the hallways, bouncing off the gray cinderblock walls. Sailors paused mid-step, glancing nervously over their shoulders. Mid-level officers exchanged uncertain looks, while senior personnel felt a flicker of unease they could not name. Rumors, once benign, now carried the weight of potential consequences. Every glance, every hushed conversation was colored with speculation. What had the Admiral noticed? What was she looking for? Emma's steps were silent yet deliberate. She passed rows of offices, filing cabinets, and digital terminals, her gaze scanning the smallest details. Nothing escaped her attention, not a smudge on a desk, not a misaligned report, not a flicker of guilt in the eyes of a junior officer. She wasn't just walking through the base. She was mapping it, absorbing it, reading the rhythm of its operation like a conductor feels the tempo of an orchestra. Her first stop was the logistics office. The room smelled faintly of ink and recycled paper, the air thick with the quiet hum of computers. Emma approached the central terminal and began reviewing supply records, inventory sheets, requisition forms, digital logs. Her eyes flicked across the screens with practiced precision, cross-referencing data, noting discrepancies that would escape the notice of most trained officers. It didn't take long to notice the irregularities. Boxes of tactical equipment were unaccounted for. Certain ship maintenance supplies had been logged as delivered but had never physically arrived. Digital timestamps had been altered, files renamed, logs modified. Everything had been done with care, enough to fool casual oversight, not enough to withstand scrutiny from someone with Emma's experience. She leaned back slightly, lips pressed together, calculating. This was not a mistake. This was deliberate. Someone on the base had been tampering with the supply chain, diverting equipment, manipulating records, possibly for personal gain or worse. A sharp click at the doorframe drew her attention. She didn't startle. Emma Rivers was never caught off guard. Two figures ducked back into the shadows, their movements awkward, deliberate. Dalton's friends. They froze, caught between fear and curiosity. They had been following her since the cafeteria confrontation, unsure whether to flee or observe. And now, they were trapped between the Admiral's awareness and their own guilty conscience. Emma didn't move toward them. She didn't need to. Her presence alone radiated awareness. They could feel it, suffocating in the small, sterile room. A quiet voice, almost inaudible, spoke behind her. "You shouldn't be here, Admiral," said Commander Hale, stepping into the room. His face was pale, tight with unease. "If they see you." "They already have," she said, eyes still fixed on the digital logs. "And they're nervous. That tells me all I need to know." Hale followed her gaze, scanning the discrepancies on the screens. Someone's falsifying records, but it's intricate. Whoever did this knows the system inside and out. Emma nodded, fingers hovering over the keyboard. "Which is why they were sloppy enough to leave traces. They think they're invisible. They're not." Outside the office, the hallways buzzed quietly. The base was alive with whispers. "Did you see the new girl?" a sailor muttered. "She's the Admiral. She knows everything. They say someone been taking supplies, millions of dollars worth." The rumors spread like wildfire. Even those who had never met Emma Rivers now speculated in hushed tones about her intentions. The young sailors didn't understand the gravity. They only knew that authority had arrived in an unexpected, unsettling form. Emma pulled up the roster of personnel with access to the supply logs. Her eyes scanned the list, moving down the names with lethal efficiency. Access, authorization, previous discrepancies, patterns emerged that narrowed the suspect list. And then she saw it. A name she didn't expect, Lieutenant Commander Briggs. A respected officer, trusted by most of the base. A man whose reputation had been spotless for years. Yet here he was, appearing repeatedly in the logs connected to the inconsistencies. Emma didn't confront him immediately. That would be premature. Observation first, patience always. "Commander," she said, standing, the hum of the monitors fatting behind her. "Notify the security team. Full base lockdown. No one leaves or enters without my authorization. We'll handle this internally first." Hale's jaw tightened. "Are you sure that's drastic?" "It's necessary," Emma said simply. And quietly, "Hale, I don't want panic, not yet." Outside, Dalton and his friends watched from the stairwell, exchanging panicked glances. Their casual mockery of the new girl had turned into a study in terror. They hadn't realized they were witnesses to something far bigger. And now, as they observed Emma calmly issuing orders, they understood that their small rebellion had placed them under scrutiny. Emma returned to the terminal, reviewing every digital record, tracing shipments, cross-referencing logs, memorizing every irregularity. She worked in silence, but her mind raced with scenarios. How deep did this go? How much of the base had been compromised? How long had the diversion been going on? Minutes stretched into hours. Outside, the whispers continued, but inside, the calculations grew sharper. Every decision, every potential suspect, every pattern. She cataloged it all with surgical precision. And then she noticed it, a subtle signal buried in the access logs. Someone had logged in remotely from an unsecured terminal. The timestamp didn't match anyone's schedule. The entry was small, almost insignificant, but to Emma it was a glaring beacon. Someone on the base was trying to cover their tracks. Her lips pressed together. Whoever it was had made a critical mistake. They assumed the new girl didn't see. Dalton's friends had been reckless, yes, but the true mastermind had been even more audacious. Emma rose from her chair, eyes scanning the office. "It's worse than I thought," she murmured. "This isn't just diversion. Someone's trying to hide something, and they're desperate." Hale frowned. "You think it's dangerous?" "Desperation is dangerous," Emma replied. "And if someone is willing to manipulate logistics and falsify records, there's no telling what else they're capable of." Outside, sailors continued to speculate. Some had begun to fear for their own safety. Others were simply in awe of the woman they had assumed was just another recruit. They had no idea that the quiet, meticulous officer observing their base was the very admiral who commanded fleets, investigated corruption, and demanded results without mercy. Emma Rivers turned from the terminal and stared out the window. Across the yard, she saw shadows flickering, Dalton and his companions, watching nervously, frozen between panic and curiosity. She knew their names, their habits, their weak points. But they were minor players. The real threat, the one hiding behind deliberate mistakes, the one orchestrating the diversion, was far more dangerous. And that realization set her mind in motion. Whoever this person was, they had underestimated her. They had assumed that the new girl was naive, inexperienced, easy to manipulate. They had assumed wrong. Emma Rivers was patient. She was precise. And she was about to start a chain of events that would expose deception, betrayal, and corruption at the very heart of the base. The whispers continued outside her office, growing louder, more frantic. But Emma Rivers paid them no heed. She was focused entirely on the evidence, the patterns, the subtle hints that would reveal the truth. And as the sun began to dip behind the distant horizon, casting long shadows across the base, a chill ran down Dalton's spine. He realized with dawning horror that the new girl wasn't just observing. She was calculating. She was strategizing. And she would not stop. For Emma Rivers, the real work was only just beginning. Because corruption, once it had been exposed, demanded accountability. And someone on the base was about to pay the price. The late afternoon sun cast long, sinister shadows across the base as Emma Rivers continued her methodical survey of the administration wing. Each corridor she passed, each office she entered, brought new details, new discrepancies, and new hints of deliberate sabotage. The atmosphere on the base had shifted completely. Whispers now carried the weight of fear, a nervous energy that pulsed like electricity through the hallways. Emma's sharp eyes scanned every monitor, every terminal, every piece of paper she touched. She had traced missing supplies, noticed patterns in falsified logs, and identified the small, careless errors that hinted at something much larger. And then she saw it, a subtle, almost imperceptible anomaly in the ship maintenance scheduling system. It was minor, barely noticeable, but to Emma it was a flashing red warning. Someone had intentionally delayed repairs on a critical vessel. A vessel scheduled for a training exercise tomorrow. One misstep, one failure, and disaster could strike, not just for the ship, but for the crew, the base, and potentially national security. Her eyes narrowed. The sabotage wasn't sloppy. It was precise, targeted, designed to appear as human error while concealing deliberate intent. Whoever had orchestrated this knew the base intimately. They had access, skill, and the audacity to manipulate systems without immediate detection. Emma didn't hesitate. She activated the internal communication system. "Hale," she said, her voice calm but urgent, "lock down the maintenance bays. Only authorized personnel with my clearance are allowed access. And send a security alert to the docks. Someone's tampering with our vessels." Hale's face paled. "You mean sabotage?" Emma's eyes didn't leave the screen. "Yes, and if we don't act fast, it could have catastrophic consequences." Meanwhile, Dalton and his companions had been trying to process the events of the day. Their mockery, their arrogance, had turned into frozen panic. The Admiral, the new girl they thought they could intimidate, was methodical, merciless, and terrifyingly effective. They knew it now. As Emma made her way toward the maintenance bay, Dalton couldn't resist following. Not out of courage, but fear. Fear of being caught in something he couldn't control. His friends reluctantly trailed behind him, whispers of concern and awe slipping past their lips. The corridors narrowed, shadows stretching like fingers across the concrete floors. Every step Emma took was precise, deliberate. The low hum of the base's operations filled the air, punctuated by distant shouts and the metallic clatter of tools from the maintenance area. When she arrived, she paused at the entrance. Two junior officers were huddled over a digital panel, their movements nervous, hands shaking slightly as they tried to correct the manipulated schedules. The moment they saw her, their faces drained of color. "Admiral Rivers," one stammered, we were just." Emma's voice was calm, even, and lethal in its simplicity. "Step aside, immediately." Her presence alone forced them back. There was no argument, no protest. She didn't need to raise her voice. Authority radiated from her in a tangible, physical way, commanding compliance without aggression. Dalton's heart raced as he watched from the doorway. He had expected resistance, confrontation, but not this, not the sheer inevitability of her control. Inside the maintenance bay, Emma quickly assessed the situation. Wiring had been subtly rerouted. Critical software patches had been delayed. Equipment schedules had been overwritten with false timestamps. Every action was precise, deliberate, and calculated. The saboteur had intended for these errors to cause cascading failures, each one compounding the next, potentially endangering lives. Her fingers flew over the keyboard, correcting entries, restoring proper schedules, and rerouting systems. All the while, her mind worked at a feverish pace, tracing digital breadcrumbs, identifying the source of the sabotage. And then she saw it, a pattern in the login credentials. A shadowed name, Lieutenant Commander Briggs. He wasn't just responsible for the inventory discrepancies, he was the architect of the sabotage. Emma didn't hesitate. She initiated a silent security alert, sending encrypted notifications to selected personnel. The saboteur would not have time to cover their tracks, not with her watching, calculating, and anticipating every move. Outside, Dalton whispered to his friends, fear tightening his voice. "She knows everything, she knows who did it." The friends nodded, white-knuckled and silent, realizing the gravity of their initial arrogance. They had been pawns in a much larger game, witnesses to a methodical, unstoppable force. Inside the maintenance bay, the tension ratcheted higher. A minor explosion, a controlled test, thankfully non-lethal, set off the alarms, flashing red across the monitors. Sparks danced from a panel where the sabotage had tampered with voltage controls. Junior officers scrambled, panicked, as emergency lights bathed the room in a harsh, staccato glow. Emma didn't panic. She moved with precision, shutting down circuits, rerouting power, and isolating the compromised systems. Every action was deliberate, measured, and calculated. Sweat beaded her brow, but her composure never wavered. Then a subtle sound reached her from the shadows, a faint metallic click, almost like the careful placement of a hand on a weapon. She didn't need to turn her head. She knew. Someone was watching, someone bold enough or desperate enough to try and intervene. Dalton froze, realizing the truth. He wasn't just afraid of the Admiral anymore. He was terrified of the unknown force behind the sabotage. Whoever it was, they had gone to great lengths to manipulate the base's systems. They were dangerous, methodical, and cunning. Emma's lips pressed together. She moved to the source of the anomaly, tracing the signals through the terminal. Each keystroke, each analysis, each correction brought her closer to the saboteur's identity. And finally, the trail led straight to Briggs. Her eyes narrowed. This wasn't just a man abusing his position. It was someone orchestrating potential disaster, manipulating supply chains, delaying maintenance, and creating chaos that could cost lives. Emma spoke into her comms, her voice calm but filled with steel. Lock down all access points. Notify security. Lieutenant Commander Briggs is under investigation for sabotage. No one enters or leaves without my authorization. Detain him immediately if he attempts to interfere. The maintenance bay fell silent, the air heavy with tension. Junior officers and sailors watched, realizing they were witnesses to an unfolding crisis that could have had catastrophic consequences if not for the intervention of the Admiral they had underestimated. Dalton's friends whispered among themselves, terrified, knowing that the arrogance of earlier moments had placed them on the edges of disaster. They had assumed Emma Rivers was just a quiet, observant new girl. Now they understood she was a force capable of dismantling a well-orchestrated sabotage before it could succeed. Outside, alarms blared, red lights flashing across the base. Security teams moved swiftly, blocking exits, checking credentials, and preparing to intercept anyone attempting to flee. Emma worked relentlessly at the terminal, coordinating with security, rerouting systems, and ensuring that the vessel's schedule would be restored to its proper operational state. The danger was real. Every second mattered. Every misstep could have devastating consequences. And then a shadow appeared at the far end of the bay, a figure attempting to slip past unnoticed. Emma's eyes narrowed. She didn't flinch. She didn't raise her voice. She simply moved, fluid and precise, intercepting the intruder with a calm authority that left no room for argument. Briggs. The man's face twisted with surprise and fear as Emma's hand pressed against the terminal panel, isolating him without a word. Her calm gaze held him in place, commanding, inescapable. "You underestimated me," she said quietly, almost conversationally, "and that mistake could have cost lives." Briggs faltered, realizing the magnitude of his failure. I didn't think." "You didn't think," Emma repeated, her voice steady, measured. "And that was your mistake." Outside, Dalton watched, heart pounding. He understood, finally, that this wasn't just a confrontation about rank or authority. It was about life, about control, about the consequences of arrogance and deception. The new girl had just revealed the lethal precision of her judgment and the far-reaching consequences of underestimating her. Emma's eyes swept the room, noting every minor irregularity, every potential threat, and every witness. Her control was absolute, her presence undeniable, her authority unchallenged. And for the first time that day, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. The sabotage had been stopped, the threat neutralized, and the base, shaken but intact, had seen the true force of Emma Rivers, the quiet, observant, seemingly harmless new girl who was in fact the Admiral and the ultimate authority. But even as Briggs was restrained, even as the systems were corrected, Emma knew this was only the beginning. Someone had attempted to undermine the base. Someone had dared to gamble with lives. And she intended to find out who else was involved, and why. Because no one underestimated Emma Rivers twice. The storm had begun. The sound of the base alarms echoed through the corridors like a distant storm, shaking even the most seasoned sailors. Every corner, every doorway, every shadow seemed charged with tension. Emma Rivers stood in the maintenance bay, her presence unyielding, as Lieutenant Commander Briggs struggled against the secure restraints. His eyes darted nervously, the arrogance of the morning completely evaporated. He had miscalculated. He had assumed the new girl would be just another junior officer, someone easily intimidated or manipulated. He had been wrong, catastrophically wrong. Emma's voice was calm, almost conversational, yet every word carried the weight of command. "You've put lives at risk, Briggs. Supplies delayed, maintenance schedules falsified, vessels endangered. Do you understand the gravity of your actions?" Briggs swallowed hard. I thought I could manage it." "You thought you could manipulate the base," Emma interrupted, eyes locking onto his with surgical precision. "You thought no one would notice. You thought you could play games with lives and walk away unscathed. That was your first mistake, and now your second is underestimating me." The officers surrounding them watched tense, unsure whether to speak or stay silent. The aura around Emma was palpable, calm, deliberate, and utterly authoritative. Even seasoned personnel felt the invisible pressure of her presence, like a tide rolling in, inevitable and unstoppable. Dalton and his friends, still lingering near the doorway, exchanged wide-eyed glances. Fear and awe were etched onto their faces. For the first time, they truly understood what it meant to underestimate Emma Rivers. Their casual arrogance had collided with precision, intelligence, and experience far beyond anything they had expected. Emma turned her attention back to the terminal, pulling up the complete log of irregularities. Every falsified entry, every rerouted shipment, every delayed schedule was laid bare. A digital map of deception that led straight to Briggs. "You weren't acting alone," she said softly, almost to herself. "Someone else has been covering tracks, coordinating efforts, manipulating others to do their bidding." Briggs' eyes flickered nervously, realizing the trap had tightened. I didn't." "Silence," Emma said, her tone sharp, cutting through his protest like a knife. "You're done making excuses. You will tell me everything starting now." Briggs hesitated, swallowing hard. The reality of his situation began to sink in. The Admiral, the quiet, unassuming new girl he had mocked, was in full control. There was no bluffing, no hiding, no negotiation. Every detail had been observed, every pattern traced, every misstep catalogued. Emma's gaze softened slightly, just enough to unsettle him further. She wasn't showing mercy, she was demonstrating control, and that control was absolute. "Why?" she asked, her voice calm but piercing. "Who orchestrated this? Why risk lives, sabotage schedules, manipulate logistics? Speak now, or I will ensure the evidence speaks for itself." Briggs swallowed again, his jaw tight. He could feel the walls closing in, the security measures tightening, the digital trail leading to him and only him. And yet he hesitated. Fear, pride, and desperation warred inside him. Emma's eyes didn't waver. "Time is a luxury you no longer have," she said. "Every second you remain silent increases the consequences. Who else is involved? Who has been giving orders, manipulating the base from the shadows?" For the first time, fear broke through Briggs' veneer of control. His voice quivered. It's Lieutenant Harris. He's been coordinating shipments, rerouting supplies, covering for me." Emma's mind raced. Harris, a known officer, trusted by many, whose reputation had always seemed flawless. Yet here he was, implicated in deliberate sabotage. The conspiracy ran deeper than she had initially anticipated. "Where is he now?" Emma asked, her fingers flying over the terminal, tracing every digital footprint, every access log. "Command quarters. He's trying to erase files, cover evidence," Briggs stammered. He didn't expect you to be here. He thought the new girl could." Emma's lips pressed into a thin line. The faintest trace of a smile flickered across her face, not for amusement but for anticipation. She had anticipated this. She had predicted it, and now she would confront the real mastermind. "Security," she said calmly, pressing a series of commands into the terminal. "Secure all exits to the command wing. No one enters or leaves. Lieutenant Harris is to be intercepted immediately. Do not allow him to destroy evidence. I want every terminal logged and every file frozen until I arrive." Hale nodded, urgency clear in his expression. "Understood, Admiral. Security teams are moving now." Emma turned her attention back to Briggs. "You will remain here under supervision until further notice. One false move and the consequences will be severe. Do you understand?" Briggs nodded frantically, fear and realization etched onto his face. His arrogance was gone. The man who had thought himself untouchable was now a prisoner of his own hubris. Emma walked briskly from the maintenance bay toward the command wing. Dalton and his companions followed at a safe distance, frozen in a mixture of fear and awe. The halls seemed longer, darker, charged with the electricity of impending confrontation. Every step Emma took was deliberate, measured, precise, her presence commanding compliance without a word of threat. The security teams moved swiftly, locking doors and monitoring all access points. Emma's mind was calculating every angle, every contingency. She anticipated Harris' moves even before they happened, predicting the paths he might take to destroy evidence or evade capture. As she entered the command wing, the tension was palpable. Officers and personnel froze, aware that the highest authority on base had returned unexpectedly. They had only heard whispers, rumors, but now the truth was undeniable. Emma Rivers was not here for ceremonial purposes. She was here to uncover the conspiracy at the heart of the base. She approached Harris Terminal, where the man himself was frantically trying to cover his tracks. Lines of code flashed on the screens, files attempted to delete themselves, but Emma's presence was a force of nature, calm, methodical, unstoppable. "Stop," she said, and Harris froze mid-keystroke, eyes wide with panic. Emma stepped closer, observing every detail, the trembling of his hands, the sweat beading on his brow, the desperate calculations flickering in his eyes. She didn't raise her voice, didn't make a threat. She didn't need to. Her authority was absolute, undeniable. "You've underestimated me," she said softly, almost conversationally. "And that was your mistake. The evidence will remain intact. Security will detain you. Every action, every command, every attempt to sabotage this base has been documented. You will answer for every choice you've made." Harris' face paled. It's not what it looks like." Emma's gaze didn't waver. "It's exactly what it looks like, and the sooner you accept that, the better your outcome will be." Outside, Dalton and his friends watched from a secure corridor, hearts pounding. They had witnessed authority, precision, and intelligence in its purest form. The new girl they had mocked, underestimated, and tried to intimidate had revealed herself as a force beyond comprehension. And the base itself had been shaken to its core. Emma signaled security, who moved swiftly to detain Harris, cutting off any possibility of further manipulation. The mastermind behind the sabotage had been exposed. The web of deceit, carefully spun, was unraveling under the Admiral's watchful eye. For the first time that day, the tension in the corridors eased slightly, though fear and respect lingered in the air. Dalton and his friends exhaled, relief mixing with awe. They had been witnesses to the dismantling of a conspiracy they hadn't even realized existed. Emma, standing tall in the command wing, allowed herself a brief moment of satisfaction. The immediate threat had been neutralized, the saboteurs identified, and the evidence preserved. But she knew this was only the beginning. The ripples of betrayal, greed, and manipulation ran deep, and the work to restore integrity and safety to the base was far from over. Her presence had changed everything. Authority, intelligence, and foresight had been demonstrated in ways the base had never seen before. And Emma Rivers, the quiet new girl, had revealed the true power of observation, strategy, and uncompromising command. The storm was not over, but for the first time, the base had a chance to see who truly commanded its future, and no one would ever underestimate Emma Rivers again. The base had settled into an uneasy calm, the echoes of alarms and urgent footsteps slowly fading into the background. Yet the tension remained, an invisible current running through the halls. Emma Rivers moved with deliberate precision, her mind already racing through the layers of deception, betrayal, and manipulation she had begun to uncover. Lieutenant Commander Briggs had been detained, but Emma knew he was only a part of a larger, more insidious scheme. The irregularities she had traced, the falsified supply logs, delayed maintenance, and attempted sabotage were too coordinated, too meticulous to be the work of a single reckless officer. Someone had orchestrated this entire web from the shadows, exploiting trust, familiarity, and hierarchy to conceal their moves. Her first stop was the intelligence office, a nondescript room with humming servers, stacks of reports, and blinking monitors. Emma's eyes scanned the screens with practiced precision, tracing digital footprints, scrutinizing access logs, and piecing together anomalies that would have been invisible to anyone less experienced. "Commander Hale," she said, her tone calm but commanding, "pull every access record for the past 3 months. Every shipment, every schedule adjustment, every log modification. I want a map of the network, who touched what and when. Start with digital and physical access points alike. No detail is too small." Hale nodded, already tapping at the keyboard. "Understood, Admiral. This will take some time, but we'll start immediately." Emma didn't wait. She began cross-referencing her own observations, the anomalies in the maintenance bay, the subtle misalignments in logistics, the shadowy presence she had detected during her initial surveys. Each data point, each inconsistency, was a thread in a vast web, one that, if followed carefully, could lead her straight to the puppet master behind the sabotage. Outside, Dalton and his companions moved cautiously, shadowing the Admiral from a safe distance. Fear had replaced their earlier arrogance, or now mingled with a creeping terror. They had glimpsed the full extent of her authority, her intelligence, and her ability to control a room without raising her voice, and they knew they were witnessing something far bigger than themselves. Hours passed. Emma worked tirelessly, tracing the threads of the conspiracy. Patterns emerged, access logs that suggested coordinated manipulation, unusual activity in offices typically considered secure, and encrypted messages routed through terminals that had no obvious connection to the supply chain. It was a puzzle designed to be unsolvable, yet slowly, methodically, Emma pieced it together. And then she saw it, a pattern too deliberate to be random. Lieutenant Harris had not acted alone. There were others, senior personnel with access and authority who had facilitated his actions. The sabotage, the falsified records, the manipulation of personnel, they were all symptoms of a larger network, a hidden web operating within the base itself. Emma's gaze hardened. This wasn't just incompetence or recklessness. It was calculated, deliberate, and dangerous. Someone had been playing a long game, exploiting the trust of the Navy's chain of command for personal gain. "Commander," she said, turning to Hale, "I need a full personnel sweep, every officer with access to logistics, maintenance, and operational schedules. Cross-check it with all recent anomalies. Identify anyone whose activity deviates from protocol. I want names, locations, and timestamps. Now." Hale nodded, urgency clear in his movements. "Yes, Admiral." As the investigation proceeded, Emma moved through the base like a shadow. Her presence alone commanded attention. Sailors straightened, officers froze mid-conversation, and whispers followed her footsteps. Everyone knew she was no ordinary officer. They knew she was the Admiral, and more importantly, they knew she was watching, calculating, and uncovering the truth. The first breakthrough came unexpectedly. A junior officer, nervous and pale, approached Emma with a tablet clutched tightly in his hands. "Admiral Rivers," he stammered, I found something. There's a pattern in the access logs, certain personnel logging in from terminals that should have been inactive, and some encrypted communications we didn't notice before. They point to a meeting tonight in the East Wing." Emma's eyes narrowed. "Who authorized the access?" The junior officer shook his head. "I don't know. It wasn't logged under anyone's credentials. It's like someone used ghost profiles, but it's definitely coordinated." Emma's lips pressed together. She had expected resistance, subterfuge, and misdirection, but this level of sophistication was impressive, even for a Navy insider. It meant the network was well organized, deeply embedded, and dangerous. "This is it," she said, her voice low but commanding. "Tonight we confront the source. Hale, assemble a team. We move carefully, decisively. No mistakes. We uncover the full web and we do it before they realize we're onto them." The hours dragged into night. Shadows deepened, corridors were eerily quiet, and the hum of the base's generators was the only sound echoing through the halls. Emma led her small team with precision, each step measured, each decision calculated. Every corner could hide a threat, every doorway could conceal an adversary, yet she advanced with unwavering confidence. When they reached the east wing, the tension was palpable. The meeting room was secured, lights dimmed, and figures moved within, shadowy, coordinated, conspiring. Emma's team paused, waiting for her signal. With a subtle nod, Emma advanced, commanding the room with an authority that left no room for resistance. The conspirators froze, realization dawning too late. "You've underestimated me," Emma said, her voice steady, cutting through the room like a blade. "And that mistake will be your undoing." The room erupted in a mix of shock and panic. Some officers tried to flee, others reached for concealed items, but security teams, coordinated under Emma's precise command, blocked every exit. No one could escape. Briggs, still restrained in a nearby holding area, watched the scene unfold, understanding that the web he had helped construct was collapsing. Dalton and his companions, hidden in the shadows, realized the depth of Emma's strategy. The quiet, unassuming new girl had methodically dismantled an entire network of betrayal. Emma's eyes scanned the room, absorbing every detail, noting every gesture, every attempt to resist. This wasn't just about catching saboteurs. It was about exposing the entire hierarchy of deception that had corrupted the base from within. The conspirators' leader, a senior officer who had remained in the shadows, manipulating and coordinating behind the scenes, finally stepped forward, realizing resistance was futile. Emma's gaze held him like a predator observing prey. "It's over," she said calmly. "Every action has been documented. Every attempt to manipulate, sabotage, or deceive has been traced back to you. You will answer for this, and there will be no exceptions." The senior officer's shoulders slumped, the weight of realization crashing down. He had played a long game, thought himself untouchable, and now faced the consequences of underestimating Emma Rivers. Outside, Dalton whispered to his friends, the words barely audible. She just took down the entire network." They had witnessed strategy, intelligence, and authority at a level they couldn't comprehend. The new girl they had mocked, underestimated, and dismissed had revealed the lethal precision of her judgment and the full extent of her capabilities. Emma turned to her team. "Secure the evidence, detain all involved, document every action, every communication, and Hale, ensure this network is dismantled completely. There can be no remnants, no loose threads." Hale nodded, awe and respect evident in his expression. "Understood, Admiral." Emma's gaze swept the room one final time. The conspirators had been exposed, their plans dismantled, and the base's integrity preserved. But she knew the work wasn't over. Corruption, once it had taken root, often left hidden tendrils. Yet for the first time that night, a sense of control settled over her. The hidden web had been illuminated, its threads severed, and the conspirators brought to justice. The base, shaken but intact, had witnessed the full measure of Emma Rivers, the quiet, observant, seemingly harmless new girl who had methodically dismantled an entire network of deception. The storm had reached its apex. The conspirators had been unmasked. And yet, the aftermath promised more challenges, more revelations, and the final confrontation that would define the legacy of Emma Rivers on this base. The shadows of the East Wing still lingered, but for the first time, the base itself seemed to exhale, a moment of uneasy relief, knowing that the true authority had revealed itself and justice had been served. Emma Rivers stood tall, calm, unyielding. She had exposed the hidden web. She had confronted the conspirators, and she was ready for whatever came next. The final act, the ultimate resolution, was approaching. The first light of dawn spilled across the base, washing the gray concrete and steel with a pale, golden glow. The night's chaos had faded, replaced by a tense calm that held in every corridor, office, and hangar. The conspirators had been detained, digital trails secured, maintenance schedules corrected. The base had survived a crisis that could have escalated into catastrophe. Yet Emma Rivers remained vigilant. She walked the halls with a purposeful stride, observing everything, noting every detail, every lingering anxiety in the eyes of her personnel. Authority wasn't just about issuing orders. It was about presence, awareness, and the quiet certainty that every action would be accounted for. Briggs and Harris, along with the senior conspirator, were confined under strict supervision in the secure holding area. Emma had ensured that every digital record, every irregularity, every manipulated file was preserved, creating an unassailable chain of evidence. The legal process would follow, but she knew that justice required meticulous preparation. The Navy's reputation, the safety of the base, and the integrity of command demanded nothing less. As she made her way toward the administrative offices, Emma was joined by Commander Hale. His face, still taut with the tension of the previous night, relaxed slightly in her presence. "Admiral, the personnel are beginning to regain composure. The digital sweep is complete, and the network has been fully mapped. Any remaining anomalies have been isolated." Emma nodded, her eyes scanning the bustling activity around her. Sailors moved with a cautious efficiency, officers whispered in hushed tones, and junior personnel glanced nervously at the Admiral who had upended their assumptions. "Good," she said, her tone calm, measured. "Ensure all debriefs are scheduled. Transparency is key. Everyone needs to understand the events of the past 24 hours and the importance of accountability." Dalton and his companions, still lingering at a safe distance, exchanged glances. Their fear had not yet faded, but it had evolved into something more profound: respect. They had witnessed authority, precision, and intelligence at a level they could scarcely comprehend. The quiet, unassuming new girl had revealed herself as the unyielding force of command, and the base had never seen anything like it. Emma paused outside a conference room where senior officers had gathered for a debrief. She allowed herself a brief moment to assess the room, noting expressions of apprehension, curiosity, and, in some cases, relief. The conspirators' network had been dismantled, but the aftershocks were palpable. Trust had been broken, authority questioned, and yet, in the quiet aftermath, a renewed sense of vigilance and respect began to take hold. Inside the room, Emma addressed the assembled officers with the precision and calm that had defined her every action over the past 24 hours. The events of last night revealed vulnerabilities, yes, but more importantly, they revealed the consequences of underestimating authority, of assuming loyalty is guaranteed, and of neglecting vigilance. Corruption, sabotage, and manipulation have no place in this command. Accountability will be enforced, and transparency will guide our actions moving forward. She paused, letting her words settle over the room like a quiet wave of certainty. The officers absorbed her message, understanding not just the reprimand but the authority behind it. This was not merely about punishment. It was about establishing a new standard, a code of integrity that would govern every action on the base. Outside the conference room, Dalton watched, trying to reconcile his earlier arrogance with the reality before him. He had assumed Emma Rivers was inexperienced, naive, a target for mockery and intimidation. Now he understood she was far more than that. She was a strategist, a leader, and a force capable of dismantling a conspiracy that threatened lives, logistics, and the integrity of the Navy itself. Emma moved on to inspect the maintenance bay. The flickering emergency lights had been replaced with steady illumination, equipment restored, and digital logs corrected. Sailors worked diligently, repairing minor damage caused by the sabotage, guided by the calm presence of their admiral. Emma observed, offering quiet guidance where necessary, her eyes catching the smallest detail, her mind cataloging efficiency, readiness, and compliance. Even the air felt different, charged with a sense of renewed purpose. Personnel whispered of the events, of the new girl who had proven herself beyond doubt. Rumors of her authority spread like wildfire, how she had intercepted a sophisticated sabotage, dismantled a network of conspirators, and restored order with meticulous precision. Dalton and his friends lingered near the bay entrance, silent, observing the scene. For them, the day had begun with fear and mockery, but it was ending with awe and reflection. They had learned firsthand that authority and competence could be subtle, quiet, yet utterly unstoppable. Emma didn't linger in observation for long. She had work yet to complete. The final step was ensuring that every officer involved in the conspiracy was processed according to Navy protocol. Every detail had to be documented, every statement logged, every evidence chain preserved. She moved with deliberate urgency, coordinating with security, legal officers, and logistics teams to guarantee that the aftermath would be orderly, thorough, and above reproach. Hours passed, and the base slowly returned to routine. Personnel resumed their duties, though a quiet tension lingered, a reminder of the night's events, a testament to the consequences of underestimating authority, and a reflection of the Admiral who had orchestrated the resolution. As Emma Rivers finally stepped onto the base's central plaza, the morning sun fully illuminating the expanse, she allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. The past 24 hours had tested every skill she possessed: observation, strategy, leadership, and decisiveness. She had faced deception, sabotage, and arrogance, and had emerged unshaken, precise, and uncompromising. Dalton approached cautiously, his expression a mixture of awe and tentative respect. "Admiral, we didn't understand, we thought." Emma turned to him, her eyes sharp yet not unkind. "You thought I was inexperienced," she said calmly. "You assumed appearances reflected capability. That was your mistake. Learn from it. Observation, discipline, and integrity define leadership, not assumptions or appearances." He nodded, words failing him, the weight of realization pressing down. For Dalton and his companions, this day had been transformative. They had witnessed authority at its finest, learned the consequences of arrogance, and glimpsed the standards by which true leaders operate. Emma's gaze swept the base. Personnel moved with renewed purpose, repairs underway, and a sense of cautious optimism spreading through the ranks. The conspirators had been exposed, their network dismantled, and the base had been secured. Yet the lesson remained clear. Vigilance, integrity, and decisive action were the cornerstones of survival and command. As she walked toward her office, the first official reports of commendation and follow-up investigations were being filed. Legal teams would process the conspirators. Logistical corrections were complete, and the base, shaken but resilient, would continue its operations with renewed discipline and respect for the chain of command. Emma paused at the office door, taking a final look across the base she now fully commanded. The sun reflected off steel surfaces, casting long shadows that intertwined with the bright light of morning. In that moment, the base was quiet but alive, a testament to order restored, vigilance maintained, and authority unquestioned. She stepped inside, closing the door behind her. The storm had passed. Justice had been served. Command had been established. And Emma Rivers, the Admiral who had arrived as a new girl, had proven herself in a way that would be remembered throughout the base for years to come. The whispers had ceased. The fear had dissipated. And yet, a quiet tension remained. A reminder that authority must always be earned, vigilance must always be maintained, and that the calm, unassuming presence of one determined officer could alter the course of lives, operations, and history itself. Emma Rivers sat at her desk, reviewing reports, monitoring communications, and ensuring that every loose end was tied. The base was secure. The conspirators were contained, and the lesson was clear to all who had witnessed the events. Underestimate the quiet, observant, and meticulous new officer at your peril. Outside, the morning sun rose fully, bathing the base in light. The day promised routine, discipline, and readiness, but everyone knew the truth. Authority had arrived in an unexpected form, and the mark left by Emma Rivers would endure long after the shadows of sabotage had faded. The base was safe, the conspirators exposed, and the Navy had witnessed the undeniable power of precision, intelligence, and unwavering command. Emma Rivers had arrived, observed, and conquered, quietly, deliberately, and absolutely. And for those who had underestimated her, the memory of the new girl would linger forever. The storm was over, the calm had returned, but the legend of Emma Rivers, admiral, strategist, and unwavering leader, was only beginning to settle into history.